There's no gavel at home. I'll call us to order. Good evening, and welcome to the Thursday, January 20th, 2022 meeting of the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission. We are, for the first time in almost 2 years, having this in City Hall, but the meeting is also broadcast live on CTN Channel 16, AT&T Channel 99, and online at a2gov.org/watchctn. Should I be reading all of this? I don't have a script this time, people, so we're flying. Just read the normal stuff at the beginning? Okay. So public commentary can be made in person tonight or by calling 877-853-5247 and entering meeting ID 977-6634-1226. You can also join through the Zoom link, which is presumably posted on the city's website and in the agenda published online. Welcome back, everybody. Can we have a roll call, Mr. Leonard?
Yes. Commissioner Mills?
I'm here.
Commissioner Gibb-Randall?
Here.
Commissioner Abrams?
Here.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt?
Here.
Commissioner Sauvé?
Here.
Commissioner Lee?
Here.
Commissioner Clark?
Here.
Commissioner Weich?
Here. There we go.
Commissioner Dish?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Very good. Next up is approval of the agenda. May I have a commissioner move the agenda? Moved by Commissioner Weich, seconded by Commissioner Lee. Any discussion of the agenda? All in favor, please say yes or raise a hand. Yes, and raising a hand's awesome. That is unanimous. Motion carries. Item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. We have before us tonight the minutes from the December 7th, 2021 meeting. Can I have a commissioner move the minutes? Moved by Commissioner Abrams, seconded by Commissioner Gibb-Randall. Any discussion of the minutes?
Yes.
Commissioner Gibb-Randall.
When I was reading through, we had talked about last time for the church that was up on Duvarin, that staff was going to talk with the designer around some issues with grading and things like that, but it wasn't recorded in any of the minutes. And I just wanted to make sure that it actually occurred because it was not memorialized in the minutes. So I just want to
Yeah, they did make some modifications to that based on those conversations. I can follow up and provide a report at an upcoming meeting about what the changes were. As discussed, it did, I think, result in some additional EV parking as well.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Any other discussion of the minutes? All in favor of the motion, please say yes, raise a hand. That is everyone. Motion carries. All right, on to item number 5, which is the reports from city administration, city council, the planning manager, planning commission officers and committees. And this is also where I point you to the written communications and petitions that were in our packet, a number that were online over the weekend and some additional added today. Councilmember Dish, do you have any report?
I do. I can report from Tuesday night's council meeting. There have actually been 2 council meetings, and I will rely on Mr. Leonard's memory to do the one that was January 3rd, or whenever that was. But we did rezone 559 Riverview Drive from township to R1D. And the annexation of the Village of Ann Arbor site and the 5 properties associated with that site, which are on Duvarin and also Pontiac, that went through. So we will be, the next stop is the rezoning. Yeah.
Mr. Leonard.
In following up on Commissioner Dish's comments, of note, on January 3rd, the city council did pass the ordinance that revises site plan review thresholds. So that's a pretty big change. You'll recall that's now a table format, so it's a little bit more user-friendly, and it also changes some of the thresholds to reduce the level of review that's required. Notably, it also puts many more site plans on the Planning Commission agenda. That is, any site plan that isn't accompanied by a legislative action such as a rezoning will have final approval by the Planning Commission rather than previously it had a recommendation often. So a pretty significant change in that regard. Then one last item, you'll note in front of, at your chair this evening, there is a draft resolution that was discussed by the City Council. It is regarding a partnership and a dialogue with the University of Michigan about developing workforce housing on university property. The City Council has requested feedback from several boards and commissions, including the Planning Commission. So I'm just introducing this and providing it for you. It will be placed on an upcoming agenda for that feedback. In the meantime, if there's any information or background that I can help provide that would help sort of with that discussion, please let me know.
Thank you very much. Are there any other commission officers or committee liaisons to other groups that have anything to report out? It's been nothing in the past month. Okay. And I typically provide the update on ORC, and we did not meet last week for lack of agenda. So last week, never mind. ORC is next week. Ignore that. We didn't meet at the end of December, though.
Correct.
All right. Then we will move to number 6, which is public comment. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about an issue that is not listed as a public hearing on the agenda. So tonight we'll have a public hearing on the planned unit development and concept plan for 350 South 5th. If you're wishing to speak on any other issue, now is an appropriate time. We will first call on any individuals who are present in council chambers to address the commission, and then we'll move to remote participants. To speak during the public hearing remotely, please press *9 if you're already listening on the phone. If you've joined through the Zoom web link, you can use the raised hand feature. And if you are watching us and would like to call in now to make a public comment, the number is 877-853-5247, and our meeting ID is 977-6634-1226. Mr. Leonard will call on the folks who remotely who have raised their hands, again, either by clicking the raised hand icon or using *9 on your phone. But first, what we'll do is, when you're speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any background sounds so that we can hear you. Regardless of whether you're joining us remotely or here in person, if at the beginning of your comments you can please state your name and address for the record, we'd appreciate it. So is there anyone present that would like to provide public comment?
I have a question.
Sure. Come on up.
I'm Doug Woj, my property, I'm a landlord at 816 Green Street. And I thought on the agenda today was 140 Hill Street.
That is not shown on our agenda.
My apologies. 140 Hill has been withdrawn.
Okay.
I do think that, the project is considering moving forward, but with the site plan review thresholds, it no longer requires site plan review. So my guess is that they will be pursuing it through a building permit process, but it no longer requires site plan review. My apologies to you and to the commission. That was noticed, but because of the withdrawal, that's why it didn't appear on the agenda.
Can I ask a question about it?
Sure.
I'm at 816 Green, which is adjacent from Hill 140, and there's a Ingress, Egress easement behind 140. Now, that easement will still always be there, right? They won't be able to build or do anything with that easement?
So that'd be a determination of the condition of the easement and the property owner, but if it is an easement benefiting another property, my assumption would be that that part of that permission would grant unfettered access indefinitely. That's typically the function of an easement. If you're interested, I'm happy to connect you with a planner who's been working on that project, and we could follow up and see what we can find out about that particular easement.
Okay, because that easement sort is my driveway so I won't be landlocked, and it goes all the way back from the green to the back property lot.
Yep. I'll come get your contact
Okay.
information, and we'll follow up with you.
Okay, that's all. I didn't know 140 wasn't on the agenda, I'm sorry.
I'm glad that you didn't wait until the end to,
Thank you.
yes, thank you. We're going to wait for Mr. Leonard, but those who have joined us remotely, again, if you wish to provide a public comment at this time, you can use the raised hand feature if you've joined through the web link. If you've called in, you can press *9 on your phone. When it's your turn to speak, Mr. Leonard you'll hear an automated announcement indicating that Mr. Leonard will also say the last 3 digits of your telephone number.
Just give it a moment. No speakers indicated yet.
Okay.
And it remains.
All right, well, there's another opportunity for public comment at the end of our agenda. We'll move on to item number 7 then, which is the public hearing scheduled for the next business meeting. And Mr. Leonard, do you have those, or should I read them?
We have one new public hearing scheduled for the February 1st meeting. It is a city-initiated TC1 rezoning petition for 69 properties in the State and Eisenhower area for city council approval. The specific property are listed, mapped on the city's project webpage for those who would like additional information prior.
Very good, thank you. Okay, we're on to regular business. Item 8A is the Ann Arbor Housing Commission proposal for a planned unit development and concept plan for 350 South Fifth Avenue. I'm assuming that we are sticking with our format that we have been, which is we'll start with a presentation by the development team, by the petitioner. We'll have a staff report, and then we'll open it up for public comment.
Sorry, when you were promoting me, did you say something about me needing to start?
We didn't yet. We're still working on the kinks here. We can see you. We can hear you, which is amazing. I was wondering how that was going to work.
All right, and Michael, we can hear you. Can you hear us okay?
Yep. Can you all hear me?
Okay. And then, yeah, we'll turn it over, Jennifer, to you and Michael, when you're ready.
Okay, great. While Michael is bringing up our presentation, I just want to introduce our team. So Michael Johnson is with the Smith Group, and he's going to be doing most of the presentation. And I don't know, Brett, if you can see whether Matt Carpenter and Forrest Yang from the RIDE are on the meeting. They are here as well. Since we are partnering with the AAATA on this site, they're also available if there's questions from the Planning Commission.
I'm not sure if it's our monitor's issue or what's happening. We're not quite seeing the presentation yet. There we go.
There it is. I'm just going to start out with just a little bit of overview background to this specific site, which is really just a reminder to the public and the Planning Commission that this is one of 10 sites that the City Council has asked the Housing Commission to work with administration and staff of the city to see which ones are the most feasible and able to have affordable housing. Because of the huge demand that there is and need in the community for affordable housing. We can actually go to the next slide, Michael. And this is just a map showing the other sites that are in the downtown that we are also looking at. So that this is one of many sites, but it's the first one to go through the planning process to request the PUD approval and supplemental regs. And I'm going to let Michael talk about the specifics of the actual PUD plan.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks all. Good to see you this evening. Just a couple of quick slides so we can spend the time in dialogue. And this is just a summary of information that is part of the agenda item that's been posted on Legistar. So just to note that this, as Jennifer alluded to, has been part of a larger engagement process, but for this site specifically, we did hold a citizen participation meeting on June 10th, and notices were emailed with residents within 1,000 feet. There's about 2,000 residents before May 18th. A quick kind of summary, again, just for those maybe that are joining this conversation a little fresher than others. This is a part of a process directed by City Council to create PUD zoning and supplemental regulations for the kind of market this project at the 350 South 5th for future development. So future developer will then be required to submit a site plan for that project and for this project. The kind of highlights of the PUD zoning is additional affordable housing and improving the existing operations and conditions around Blake Transit Center. The concept plan proposes 370 dwelling units, of which 145 are proposed to be affordable. No off-street parking, but additional parking for 4 AAATA buses, and then you'll see 113 bicycle parking spaces proposed. We've been in coordination with the county, but site plan forthcoming will provide additional detail on stormwater management systems. The concept plan you'll see today achieves 867% floor area ratio. And the concept plan proposes a building 250 feet tall with then some additional overruns. So we're asking for 275 feet as part of the supplemental regulations that we'll get into as part of this effort here. You can see the brief chart on the screen that summarizes the kind of proposed ask from the PUD compared to existing D1 zoning, and then what's kind of required and permitted. And that chart, of course, is available in the materials. And then I'll just quite briefly walk through kind of a high-level summary of the supplemental regulations for the benefit of everyone today. And so what is being discussed is potential 2 phases, an all-affordable phase and a mixed income phase. And the ask is that the affordable phase shall be developed, constructed, and occupied first or concurrently with that mixed income phase as part of these regulations. Some of the principal uses which should be prohibited in light item B, and additionally some of the accessory and temporary uses that would be prohibited in light item C. For D, regarding the area height and placement standards, you can see the additional ask for up to 50% of the property frontage along the secondary streets of 4th and 5th exceeding the required setbacks due to the need to accommodate the additional bus lane. And then, of course, as we discussed earlier, the height ask up to 275 feet that will allow the accommodation of the FAR within that's under the D1 zoning, but because of that additional floor area for the transit use, the height is asked to be increased. You can see some of the parking and transportation supplemental regulations, most notably no limitations on the driveways, again, to accommodate the additional bus lane service lane. Similarly, in light item F, we're asking that no street trees be required along the 4th and 5th sections of the street, again, due to the bus lane. However, there are additional plans are being discussed, at least along 4th for now, that could supersede that. And then in light item G, kind of the summary on the affordable housing piece, that we're asking that in this affordable phase, that would be first or concurrently, 100% of the dwelling units shall be affordable as defined by the UDC. And then in the mixed income phase, 20% of the dwelling units shall be affordable. In this phase only, and this is worth noting, that the requirement could be satisfied via payment in lieu. And then the final point here would be on sustainability. We've added the four bullet points to require additional regulations to make sure that this site, as well as future sites, hopefully, that we're talking about, as Jennifer alluded to, target the A20 goals, and we think that these criteria will help get us there. Just some quick images, and then we'll go to comments. This is the conceptual dimension plan in plan view. You can see William in the foreground, 4th on the left and 5th on the right. The provision for the service lane to serve the building adjacent to the bus parking and bus lane with the dashed line showing where the extent of the building is conceptually proposed, both over the kind of darker shaded ground floor, and then at least over the bus lane and service lane in some components. And the circulation plan from a conceptual standpoint that begins to lay out the variety of modes to serve this site, in addition to provisions for bike storage at the ground level, and required trash uses, in addition to resident lobbies and the kind of preservation of active ground floor use opportunities along William and turning the corner at 4th and 5th. We've worked with Wade Trim to provide the multimodal trip generation calculations that you saw as part of your agenda item, that you can see some of the assumptions here. And then the last two images are just some of these conceptual architectural perspectives and elevations that kind of illustrate what could be possible within these new PUD regulations. So you can see those views from the southeast, the northeast, the southwest, and the northwest. And then finally, the elevation views with some of the dimensions, both in the horizontal and vertical dimension from both the south, the east, the north, and the west. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and we can open it up for discussion.
Very good. Thank you very much. Is Mr. Khan joining us to provide a staff report?
I am. I am
Excellent.
happy to give you a quick summary. One of the things I wanted to point out was a little bit of the history of the site. The site was owned by the YMCA for decades. The most recent version of the YMCA on this site was constructed in the 1960s. The YMCA then, in the middle of 2000s, moved to West Washington Street, and quickly thereafter demolished the building. The city was able to eventually acquire the site and constructed a temporary parking lot that has been managed by the DDA. Just a little history. With regard to staff involvement, we've been involved with the Housing Commission and Smith Group from the very beginning, and support the project. Staff recommends approval of the planned area plan because it complies with all applicable local, state, and federal ordinances, standards, and regulations. It will not cause a public or private nuisance, and it will not have a detrimental effect on public health, safety, or welfare. Staff further recommends approval of the PUD zoning because the project is consistent with the goals of the downtown plan and the Housing Commission plans and policies. And that's a quick summary of my staff report.
Very good, thank you very much. All right, next, we will open the public hearing. It's so hard to remember, like, what we do. And as before, we'll start with any folks that have joined us here, which we have no one anymore, so we will move directly to those who have joined us remotely. Again, if you are watching us and want to call in, our call-in number is 877-853-5247, and the meeting ID is 977-6634-1226. Once you've dialed in, you can press *9 to digitally raise your hand on your phone to indicate that you'd like to speak. If you've joined us through the web link, then you can just use the raised hand feature that's on the bottom of the Zoom screen. Mr. Leonard will call on those who have indicated they're interested in speaking by the last 3 digits of your telephone number if you've called in by phone, or whatever name you have put on your Zoom link. Please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sound so that we can hear you clearly. And please do state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Mr. Leonard, has anybody indicated an interest in speaking?
Yes, Mr. Westfall, you have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Hi, good evening, Commissioners. Kirk Westfall, 3505 Charter Place. Just calling generally to speak in support of this. I'm really excited to see this plan moving forward and your vote tonight, not just for the number of affordable units that it provides, which is obviously a huge priority. I also really appreciate the fact that this is breaking the artificial height barrier downtown that City Council imposed on buildings 15 years ago against the wishes of the Planning Commission. So hooray, got to start somewhere. And when I saw the floor plans, I'm encouraged that a lot of the street frontage is labeled active use. This is, I worked on the Connecting William Street plan several years ago, which the goal of that plan was to look at all the properties, the city-owned properties along William Street, and one of the, it's in the list of comprehensive plan supporting documents, and one of the themes that came out loud and clear over that feedback process was that people wanted to see some kind of street life and eyes on the street on that block, given that there's, the Library Lane parking structure and not a lot going on aside from the beer depot until you get to Main Street, especially on the corners of the building, just so you can see it as you're coming down 4th or 5th and walking across William. So I realize circumstances have changed for this site over the years. Nobody contemplated that the city would be a partner in the development or that it would be mostly affordable, but to the extent possible, I would encourage the inclusion of a mention of retail uses, if at all possible, in the supplemental regulations, if you deem it appropriate to amend that. I just think, whether it's a small little concession stand or whatever it is, I think it would be important to have some kind of viable retail on one of those corners, or preferably both. That's all I have. Thanks for the discussion, and excited to see this move forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Adam Juszkiewicz. Adam Juszkiewicz, you have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Hello, this is Adam Juszkiewicz from the 4th Ward. I live at 1430 Las Vegas Drive. And I would also like to just support this development. I love it. And I think a lot of these are going to echo some of the stuff that that Mr. Westfall said. I love that this is the kind of thing that we're spending our affordable housing millage on, and we need to be building more of this kind of stuff. And I went to the Y a number of times as a kid, and classes, swimming, that kind of stuff. And it's great to see this space being utilized for something other than just storing cars, which is all it is now. And I love that it gets rid of what I feel is the worst kind of parking, which is a surface parking lot. And I love the housing. I love that there's going to be a lot of affordable housing. I love the high FAR. I agree that we should have more tall buildings downtown. I love it's close to jobs and shopping, other amenities like the library and the post office. I love that it doesn't have on-site parking and encourages the use of transit and bikes. And speaking of that, it's pretty much as adjacent to transit stops as you can possibly get. It's adjacent to the William Street Bikeway. The bike parking is great. I hope that that we can accommodate lots of different kinds of bikes with different types of bike racks in the bike parking, because cargo bikes don't necessarily work with two-tier racks, but two-tier racks are great for being able to get more bikes in there. So, have a mix of different kinds of bike racks. I love the mixed use, having some office space there, having some ground floor space. I hope that is utilized to activate the street. And I love all the stuff around making Fourth into kind of a transit area and like improving stuff for buses and all of that along Fourth Avenue there between this and the parking garage. And I guess I love that we're adding affordable housing. I mentioned that before, but yeah. So this is great, and I hope to see more of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other callers, Mr. Leonard?
Yes, Mr. Caruso. Mr. Caruso, you can unmute yourself and address the Planning Commission for 3 minutes.
Hi, could you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, so with the Alums Creek Watershed Group, representing the Alums Creek Watershed Group, I'd like to request 5 minutes, please.
Go ahead.
So I'm a founding member and coordinating member for the Alums Creek Watershed Group. Been involved for over 30 years in watershed issues. We support affordable housing in Ann Arbor. We just want to support sensible affordable housing. Ann Arbor has a $1 billion 820 resolution that needs to be taken seriously. This and other very tall buildings do not seem to support that. You need to publish the proposed carbon emissions from the plans for this building and how much carbon will be produced in its use. High carbon emissions do affect weather conditions. Our weather is changing very quickly here in Southeast Michigan and elsewhere due to global warming related to climate emissions. A report from Fast Company regarding tall buildings states, and I quote, according to a new study, the neighborhood of skyscrapers results in about 140% more total emissions than a lower rise area of the same population. An example would be Paris neighborhoods. Taller and denser isn't necessarily better for the environment, according to a new study published by the journal NPJ Urban Sustainability. By studying the full life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of urban development, from the production to the transportation to the building materials to the energy required to use it and to live in the buildings over time, an international team of researchers has found that high-rise cities are actually producing more emissions than shorter but still dense urban areas. Ann Arbor voters recently overwhelmingly voted down the proposal for a 17-story high-rise building across the street from the site in favor of a central park on the city-owned land. That vote should not be ignored. The mayor and his supporters and city council proposed unlimited building heights in Ann Arbor, which is not discussed very much anymore due to resident pushback. A 20-story concrete and/or steel building has an enormous carbon footprint of about 20 million pounds of carbon into the atmosphere just for concrete and steel alone. That does not include the actual construction related carbon emissions, which is also considerable. Paris, for example, is mostly 5 or 6-story buildings. It produces fewer overall emissions than other sprawling exurbs and skyscraper cities, given the land required to tall buildings and carbon-intense building materials like aluminum and steel it takes to construct them. A neighborhood of skyscrapers would result in about 140 total emissions than Paris's low-rise area of the same population. Tall buildings isolate residents, especially children, elderly, and disabled. Tall buildings are also incredibly inefficient compared to smaller buildings to about 8 stories. Poor insulation, windows, HVAC, and non-window siding, if any. Most are built with extensively very inefficient glass siding. New York City is now taxing tall buildings based on excessive energy use in an attempt to force owners to make the buildings more energy efficient and cut carbon emissions for New York City. Most building owners say they cannot do this because of their building's design. 10 tall buildings in New York City produce more carbon emissions than all other buildings in the city due to poor building design, shoddy construction, and upkeep. Ann Arbor tall buildings are not built to good standards. They're according to reliable sources at City Hall. There's poor insulation, installation, poor ceiling, and they're just poorly producing or putting out more emissions than they should. More excessive carbon emissions mean more dangerous weather in our community, like the now common 100-year, 1% chance rains in southeast Michigan and causing death and major damage. No parking required for this building is great for the developers with more income, but it's very bad for the citizens of Ann Arbor, especially nearby neighborhoods whose streets will be completely parked up 24/7. Not that these residents were expecting this or want it. So thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Greg, you can unmute yourself and address the Planning Commission for up to 3 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Beautiful. Yeah, this is Greg Pratt, Ward 3. I'm just calling because I'm really excited about this particular development and happy to see Jennifer Hall and Michael's faces. I haven't met Matt before, but I've been waiting for this for a while. I remember advocating for this space for affordable housing back when people were telling me there's no way it was possible. And now I know we have to find developers who will partner with us on this. And I know we have lots of other sites that we can use these affordable housing dollars for, but I just am, I don't know, I'm really excited about this. And I want to, of course, say that I support the development here. Thanks for everybody's work on this and for your time.
Thank you.
Caller with the phone number ending with 534. Caller with the phone number ending with 534. You can address the Planning Commission for up to 3 minutes.
Good evening. This is Tom Stahlberg calling from Lowertown in Ann Arbor. I want to talk about PUDs in general a little bit. And first off, this site, so many people are looking forward to the development of this site as affordable housing. I am one of those people. I want to watch how this one unfolds, but I also want to put it in some context of what we've done with PUDs over the past few years. And I'm going to talk about Lowertown, the Garnet, Lockwood on Jackson Road, the Glen, Broadway Park West, and 415 West Washington, which is upcoming as well. So when Lowertown came to the Planning Commission from the very beginning, citizens spoke out against the plan that was being proposed and that it wasn't meeting the comprehensive plan, which it did not, and that it was the comprehensive plan called for a PUD. It was zoned for a PUD. And as we know, there was a convoluted application and process to approve it as exactly what a PUD would be, but everything except the label of a PUD, and also shortchanging the citizens of $9 million of affordable housing money, or 93 units built on site. That's inexcusable. It's unforgivable. And for as many people who've tried to deny it on social media, the city has never done anything other than issue a flat-out denial. Nobody at the city has ever explained with any rationale how that could have happened. We have something that is a PUD and everything but name and the $9 million. And that is simply indisputable that had it been approved as a PUD, we'd have those 93 units or $9 million for the exact same site plan. When the Garnet came up for approval, again, it was an inappropriate application. It ended up being approved as a PUD instead, which kind of bailed out a problem that was created by the city itself. In the case of the Garnet, people wailed about, oh my gosh, a PUD is so bad there. PUDs are horrible. No, they're not. PUDs are fine if they're used properly. If they're abused, they're not fine, which in the case of Lockwood on Jackson Road, that was denied and turned down because it was a use of the PUD to get around the appropriate zoning. The property didn't meet the current comprehensive plan, and rather than changing the comprehensive plan and to see if that would have been acceptable, and then
30 more
the
seconds.
zoning would have met that with standard zoning, they tried to use a PUD to get around it, and they were appropriately turned down. The Glen was approved as a PUD, and there's money for the affordable housing fund there, $500,000. Broadway Park West was approved as a PUD. I'm not sure the total final amount, but there's money for the affordable housing fund. I've reviewed 415 West Washington's application for a PUD, and it's an inappropriate use of a PUD to get around the proper process and the proper use of what a PUD is for. We'll get into that more later.
Thank
But
you.
I look forward to an appropriate application of the PUD law to this parcel here. Thank you.
Thank you.
No other speakers, Chair Mills.
All right, very good. I will close the public hearing then and read the motion. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the 350 South Fifth Avenue concept plan and development agreement and PUD planned unit development zoning. Moved by Commissioner Dish, seconded by Commissioner Weich. Discussion. Who wants to kick us off? Go ahead, Commissioner Abrams.
I'm going to start with a kind of small question. I wondered if you could give us some rationale behind the William Street setback being up to 20 feet.
Hey, hello, Commissioner Abrams. This is Michael Johnson. The setback requirements and Brett or Jennifer, you can correct me if I'm misstating any of this, but I do think that there was interest in making sure that there was some flexibility in a developer to set back that tower if needed from both a Fourth Avenue perspective and from adjacency to the parking garage. If that could be accommodated in a way that still met the height requirements, we just wanted to provide that flexibility. But Jennifer or Brett could chime in here if I'm misstating that.
No, I would add that I think part of it was also talking about flexibility for that active use in the context of the bikeway there as well, providing maybe some flexibility for outdoor spaces, given that unlike some other areas of the city, we don't really have the flexibility to think about bump outs in the same way as we might in some other downtown blocks.
Great, that's helpful, thank you. And then my other question, which was also beginning kind of small, is could you say a little bit more about the provision that there will not be any street trees required along 4th and 5th Avenue? I understand that there's the right-of-way for the Blake Transit Center buses, but I wondered about the portions of 4th and 5th that are in front of the building.
Yeah, I think the request at that time was primarily driven by the Blake components and not linking completely to what may happen along 4th or 5th. We wanted to also acknowledge that could be additional drop-off zones to serve the building. It is a challenging site from a vehicular access and a bus access, and we're going to be required to use kind of every side as possible. So that was the thinking and asking for some flexibility there from the tree requirement standpoint.
This is maybe a question for Mr. Leonard or Mr. Khan, but does it ever make sense in a supplemental regulation to express a preference? In other words, that a kind of like something like street trees would be preferable but not required, or some way to kind of like state a value? And I guess also a related question, is there any open space requirement?
I'll let Jeff address the open space requirement for downtown, but as it relates to preference, the short answer is no. Like other zoning districts, this PUD is creating a zoning district for this site, and we want it to be measurable. That said, you could definitely put it in there, but unless it's a requirement, it will have no bearing. I would say too that in the conversations, the intention is for this to be a high-quality development. I think, being that the Housing Commission's involved, by no means is there a desire to, it's not, that doesn't reflect a desire or an opposition to trees. It's just recognizing that as this goes through the planning process, particularly in this downtown site, because it's got a pretty wide vehicular access compared to some other sites because of the combination of the bus access and the service lane to service the building, it just really narrows the space in which we have flexibility to meet that requirement. Ultimately, though, if the commission felt strongly about it, you would just omit that, make the suggestion that not be included, and then they'd be required to be programmed in as per code. And then Jeff, do you want to address open space as part of the review?
Sure. There's not currently an open space requirement in the D1. PUDs are customized zoning districts that could include pretty much whatever the city wants to include in terms of base requirements. But there's not currently a requirement for the D1 zoning district for open space.
Okay, thanks. I'll just say I'm not in favor of, or I'm not inclined to do things that remove flexibility. That seems like a really important component of this. But given given all of the tough site constraints, I think, I'm just wondering whether, I know we want a quality development, but I think we also understand as a body that unless we have these things in writing, we have no way of we don't have any leverage. And so something could be built with no land, no green whatsoever by right here, right? So if this was approved as written, which maybe is okay because we want to encourage flexibility and we want
To be clear, though, I just want to make sure it's clear that it's only for the 4th and 5th Street. We're not
Not for
proposing any
William.
exemption for the William Street frontage.
Right, that's true.
And even though it's not showing up in this plan, because it's not really on our property, our intent is to blend the two sites together. So where the Blake is and where the boundaries between our two properties are, we're going to need to totally reconfigure that space and make it more park-like and accessible to people walking back and forth. It's not going to be a wall and then you have to go all the way around to get to our building. But that is an area that we're definitely going to make, a lot of effort towards amenities for the public that are going to be in and around the Blake Transit Center.
Okay, great. That sounds wonderful. Thanks.
Commissioner Gibrandl.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that. I have concerns about that too, and if I'm looking at your, the sheet that shows all of the color-coded kind of movement that you have for buses and bikes and all those kinds of things. And I guess I'm seeing that I think you could still pull off a space on both sides and still have a tree on each of those sides and be able to make it, especially on the Fifth Ave side, because that's a one-way system going in there. So you don't have the same site triangle issues there in terms of people being able to pull out into traffic. And I just think you can do it. I do. So I'm hesitant to kind of, I think you can be creative about it, frankly. And I don't think we necessarily need two spots on either side for deliveries and, all that kind of thing. So I feel like it's really important as a pedestrian just walking around downtown Ann Arbor and the places where we don't have that, namely, especially a couple of U of M newer buildings that didn't put any street trees. It's brutal there in the afternoon in the summertime or something like that. And frankly, even waiting for the bus along in there because, those coverings aren't necessarily shade. And I just think the quality of things feels so much better if you can have trees. And, I don't expect 5 along there, but I think that you could still be able to pull that off. So I guess I have higher expectations in terms of your ability as designers to be able to accommodate all those things, because it looks to me like you've got a decent amount of space there in terms of some car movement for pulling off and doing drop-off, as well as being able to have a tree in there. So I am inclined to not grant the not doing any street trees in there, because I feel like you can do it. So I think that it has an impact not just on the development, but on everybody else who uses this area too. So that's my opinion on that. I also have a couple of other questions too, and that is, and I get it that we're not doing a site plan at this point, but I would really like to see, and it's just difficult for me to tell on the plan, but do you all plan on having some just hoop parking at the street too, in terms of people being able to pull up and park there on bikes in the right of way there, on the property anywhere?
There is some existing hoop parking along William Street that is showing up as, remaining or at least being replaced in kind. But I do think that could be considered as certainly as part of the future streetscape design, and frankly, that comment would apply, I think, to 4th and 5th. We were concerned about not being able to meet the required quantity and spacing of trees because such a large portion of that frontage is dedicated to bus. But if the body does feel like there's a compromise either in quantity of trees required on the site or some percentage of those required to be placed, would defer to both the planners and the group here to answer both your questions, Commissioner Gibrandal.
Yeah, and again, I'm flexible on amounts. If you all are trying to cram in too many things there, I'm flexible on that, but just saying none, that's what I feel strongly about not allowing. And so you're saying, though, that you would plan on having hoop parking at the street level too, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think what I'm saying is that would be something that we would anticipate coming back to you at the site plan level with designs for.
Okay.
And so, I think, the intention here, as was stated, is that Jennifer Hall and the Housing Commission will continue to be the owner, or at least, involved in this development. And so, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I would encourage that, I guess, because I know with the development that we did on South Main, despite the fact there's a bike room that's really nice and it's got all kinds of amenities in it, so many people still park out on the street, and the hoops that are out there that we have are used constantly. And so I think that for anybody visiting and for the kind of, like, I'm just here for an hour or two and then I'm leaving, people use it a lot. So I would encourage, especially if this building, there's no cars, I mean, so obviously they're going to need permanent storage too, but there's a lot of times when you just, you're not going to be there for long and you want to be able to kind of pop in and out and not have to have the trouble of going, into the larger bike storage area. My other question is for Mr. Carpenter, and that is there any kind of potential plan for, I know that you all are pretty crammed into the Blake Transit Center in terms of your administration, and have you all had any discussions about using any of the active ground floor use for any future expansion for you all, or is that really just going to be more of a kind of retail space that you all are thinking about?
Thank you. Are you referring to ground floor in the new development or in the
Yes.
existing?
In the ground floor in the new development.
Okay, thank you. At this point, we have no intentions of putting any other transit functions in the new buildings at all.
Okay. All righty. I think that's all I have for now. Thanks.
Go ahead, Commissioner Sauvé.
Thank you. I'm very excited to see this in terms of just progress in the city and this project in general in terms of a lot of our goals. I think I'm just going to continue the conversation about parking and maybe ask staff for a clarification. From the PUD, it says no vehicular parking shall be required. Is that including cars and bicycles? Or is that just cars?
The intent of that is just to say that vehicles would not be required. Bicycle parking certainly would be a substantial part of any future development project here.
Okay, so our current bicycle parking standards would be applied to this project at its scale.
Well, again, with the PUD, it's going to be customized, but basically we are going to be looking toward the requirements in the UDC and for the future developer and owners to address those standards.
Yeah, if I could jump in briefly on that. So just as a reminder, and maybe also for newer commissioners who don't have as much experience with planning and developments, remember planning and development as created in the ordinance is a sort of custom zoning district, and it's intended when there are aspects of a proposal that don't fit into one of our existing zoning districts. In this case, when they are structured, if it is not specifically addressed in the PUD supplemental regulations, then it's going to default to the regulations that would be in place before. So in the absence of, for example, with bicycle parking, in the absence of a higher standard or lower standard identified explicitly in the PUD supplemental regulations, we will measure a future site plan by what the ordinance would require of any development in any zoning district in that regard. So if there was a desire to increase that or decrease it, that would be the place to put it in. Absent that, yes, it will be measured by the existing requirements for bicycle parking that exist in the ordinance today. And if I can also just touch again the questions about bike hoops on the sidewalk and the like, I just want to clarify that the ordinance does provide, and that's what's being proposed here, is a PUD zoning district with a concept plan. This concept plan is obviously pretty high level, and it's intended to demonstrate what could be constructed under this zoning district. It is not, we are not binding the site to that site plan. Any future site plan will have to go through that review. That's where a lot more details, measuring parking and the like. So I just want to make sure that that's clear as well, that the concept plan is really, again, it's a bit of an illustrative tool to help the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council understand what could be realized. It doesn't mean that that's what is going to be realized. The question to Commissioner Abrams, What is going to be there is those parameters that are made requirements within the supplemental regulations.
Thanks, that's helpful. I was, mainly my concern was almost how vague the line item was of no vehicular parking required and just the overall parking table and making sure that we have like the right language to capture just for the cars and not bicycles to give that leniency. I guess to that, on the concept plan, the one thing that is a little concerning as well is just the fully loaded bus service lane. And what sticks out to me, like clarification, maybe on the design intent that we're looking at right now, is the exterior refuse areas and how that looks to like function and interact in that corridor. Because it looks like we've got two areas of exterior bins that are right along that service corridor there. And with just like the very active public in that area, like what is intended in terms of people being able to just like open up dumpsters and throw stuff in and be in public garbage, or is that intended to be secured for residents? Like what is the purpose behind those? Just to make sure.
I can chime in on the design intent again. Not required as part of the area plan or the PUD at this point, but you know, I would say given that we want to make sure that the new Blake you know, bus staging area and waiting area is you know, as pleasant and active and vibrant as possible here, I would imagine that would all be behind a screen where you see those kind of columns between the bus lane and the service lane, whether that's, you know, an actual wall or a screen, so that service, you know, could be accommodated from 4th and 5th, right, but not visible from the bus. Similarly, one that could be handled at the building level too. Due to the way that trash is required, and we've gone back, you know, back and forth with city staff to make sure that this does meet the requirements for waste removal. Those would be in line, so the trash trucks could move in, the receptacles could be rolled out and taken care of within that service lane, and then rolled back in, and then enclosed if that was desired as well. So that's kind of the design intent behind how that system, very kind of complicated area within this building works.
Thank you. I mean, there is no back to this building, so it gets very difficult facing 3 streets and having to connect to, you know, a lot of public services. So I understand at some point we need to connect to all the kind of back of house services. And I think the other thing that I just want to verify, because we do have a one-way street and a two-way, you know, two-way streets, is that if 5th ever went to two-way, that the curb cuts and things are intended to be engineered, like these can operate as one-way service drives in the middle, but we have these engineered that if things move to two-way, curb cuts and things are flexible for those adjustments outside of the site for traffic flow. Yes.
We have looked at that and made those considerations. Yeah, I think the bus flow at the Blake is important to go in the kind of direction it's shown, but that's, you know, further to be designed as well. You know, I think what you're approving today is that kind of setback area that we know is required for the bus staging and the space for the buses to pass through. And yeah, we have run those radii, assuming, you know, future scenarios where those roads, the 5th specifically, could go to two-way in the future.
Great. I think those are all my questions for now. Looking forward to it.
I'll come back to you, Commissioner Hammerschmidt. I'm realizing that here it's hard to see all of the faces at once. Commissioner Weich.
So glad to see this proposal before us. So I just want to start there, excited for it. Want to echo some of the callers, just to see this development, see the housing that's going to be built here. So thank you, thank you, thank you. A few questions, and I'm going to just continue the conversation around trees because I was, like Commissioner Abrams, surprised by the indication that there would be no street trees. I think the Commissioner Gib Randall talked a lot about sort of the harms of just how brutal it is walking along those easements. And so I wanted to understand, I know this is the conceptual plan that Brett just cautioned us around, but I wanted to understand, is there any way, as you are moving along in this process, to conceptualize, at least in the plans, that sort of park-like area that Jennifer Hall mentioned, to sort of blend the two spaces? And is that a place where we might see some trees that might be placed in that space, or is that all being planned as sort of a impervious surface area from the building as it approaches the Blake Transit Center? So I'll start there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll chime in and say, you know, we very much looking forward to continue working with, you know, Matt and his team, the DDA and their team, Jennifer and the team, and here at the team of the city, to get the site plan to a place where we all are excited about, right? And I think that will include, you know, the review by landscape and others that didn't occur at this concept plan level. And I think we all have the same vision for making sure the streets are active, the bus area is vibrant, that it flows seamlessly to allow optimal, you know, transit rider comfort, and that flows right into 4th and 5th as well. So I think, again, things that weren't necessarily addressed at the concept plan level and the area plan level, but certainly would be at the site plan level. I don't know, Matt, if you have other things that you'd like to chime in for there.
Sure. That's an excellent question. And, you know, from the ride's point of view, I think we would look forward to the site planning exercise, specifically, you know, where can we improve landscaping? Listening to this conversation really reinforces the importance of that aspect and of the trees. And it made me think that the south-facing wall of the Blake Transit Center right now is often just a blank brick wall. Might be a nice place if we could see about some foliage. That might be a spot to do it. The intent of Blake in this work is to create a double-sided bus platform, and you can see what we call sawtooth bus bays on both the north and south sides. That's very intentional so that people transferring from one bus to another can just walk across the platform, walk onto the next bus. So we do have some limitations about where we can put trees in that area, but you know, right up against the wall of Blake might be an area worth exploring in the site planning process, and I look forward to doing that.
And so I think you just answered one of my other questions, was along the bus parking side, and I'm looking at the color coordinated movement slide in the plan that we have. Is that area adjacent to the Blake Transit Center, I think you just said this, is that going to be an active loading sort of zone? So you have the bus parking, and I think you've made spaces for 4 buses. I imagine buses are moving along that pathway as indicated by the arrows, but would there be any loading of folks on that side? And I'm not sure if I just heard you say that there is going to be or there isn't going to be. You're muted.
Not a Zoom meeting until someone starts talking when they're muted. When you look on the south bus lane here on the Y-Lot site, there's effectively 2 lanes. The first is the parking lane for the buses. That's where those sawtooth bus bays are. The bus goes in at an angle precisely so that it can pull out, and if necessary, pass the tail end of the bus ahead of it to get into the next lane, which is the travel lane. That's the southernmost part of that. There is no passenger loading in that other lane. That is a travel lane. By our operational practices, we would never pick somebody up there. Certainly, maybe in an emergency or something, but certainly not as a routine practice. The boardings and alightings are to happen when the bus is parked in the bays. The other lane is just for buses passing each other.
Okay. And then can someone speak to the air quality concerns that I know that we raised in the pre-PUD process and how that is being mitigated in the plan? I saw some notation on the plan with it, but if you could just give me and anyone who's interested in that just a quick overview.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, the acknowledgement here that it's an urban site, right? And there will be, emissions that we will have to deal with both from vehicles adjacent to and at least in the short term from buses. And so I think the things that we can do to mitigate that from the site level would be primarily at the building level, and that would certainly be the additional level of detail that we can provide as part of the site plan approval. There's the notes that you're talking about are talking about building level monitoring and air quality controls and all of those kind of things that we could anticipate. Other than that, Matt, I know that we look forward to working with you to talk about, the future of the buses and what we can do in the short term and the long term to mitigate that as well.
Sure, and I can confirm for the commission's consideration that we have begun our study of zero emissions buses. There's a lot of interesting technology out there, both battery electric and hydrogen, both of which have no tailpipe emissions. We're probably, a few years away from being able to actively implement that, but the guiding vision behind that research really is, I think, an assumption that we will transition to a zero emissions fleet. It's more of a question of when, not if, and hopefully this work that we'll be doing over the next several months will help us get a more clear picture of that.
Chair Mills, I have two more. Should I? Okay. So then the other question that I was concerned about is still looking at that same slide. There is the service lane that's on the slide there, and I'm wondering if how, for instance, as a biker in Ann Arbor, I often see delivery trucks in the bike lane, and on Williams, I've encountered some which I have to go around aggressively, and so I wonder, is that service lane going to be available for delivery trucks and things like that, or is that just an intended service lane for like emergency services, trash and refuge? Like, how is that being captured here?
Yeah, I think, again, the intent here is both the width and the kind of orientation of that lane, because of the constrained nature of the site, is that it's going to have to do all of those things, okay. Commissioner Weiss. So both trash, delivery, all of the kind of pickup and other things like that. I do not anticipate that would be, kind of pickup drop-off areas for residents, again, which is what would push that kind of very limited pressure back on 4th and 5th as we think about that as well. So.
Okay. And then just general bike parking, again, to pick up Commissioner Sauvé's comment around especially having that retail space available at the ground level. If I understood it correctly, there's only 2 spaces that are available for the general public. The 113 spaces that are on the plan are for residents. Did I understand that correctly?
We understood the requirements, and again, as the default requirements here, were the number of indoor parking spaces required because of the scale of the building, and that's what's been provided in interior. We've not noted the exterior bike parking spaces, but I think that certainly would be something we would show on the site plan.
Okay,
Sure.
thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lee.
To say I'm so excited for this, by the way. I'm so glad to see you guys in person. I can't wait till we're actually able to engage in person as well. So here's the hoping for an endemic shift soon. Here's a question. What's the rationale of requiring 100% affordable in the first phase and then doing the mixed income? Is there some kind of a funding requirement? And I'm just wondering, what if a developer comes in and says, I want to do 40/60 because that makes sense. I don't want to be too restrictive. So is there a rationale behind the 100% required in phase one?
Yeah, I can answer that question. This is the one site that has city debt on it when it was repurchased from the previous owner. And so it has different kinds of financial pressures, and it's also a very large site. So in an ideal world, I would try to do 2 small affordable towers possibly. I had a lot of discussions about that and how that would look and what that would mean and why not maximize the space and, like round and around in circles. But when it comes down to financing affordable housing, the single biggest source of financing to make this project and other projects happen is low-income housing tax credits. And that source of financing has a total development cost sort of cap that caps the number of really how big of a project you can do without doing it as a phased approach. And you can't phase a individual building, you can phase multiple buildings. So even 90 in that smaller, all affordable, doing it as a tax credit, primarily tax credit finance deal, that's pretty much maximizing what you can do under that type of financing. And so that was why it is designed that way. The second building, I don't know how we would ever finance that, a 200 unit building as all affordable. So we're looking at that as really a market rate with affordable included. And part of that is really actually driven by the pressures of the city debt that's on the property, which is not the case in any of the other properties that we're looking at. There's not time pressures, there's not money pressures like on, recouping that financing. And the other thing about the 2 buildings and why one is all affordable and one is not is we really want to include on this site, it used to have, I can't remember if Jeff brought this up, but when he was given the history of the site, the Y used to have 100 SRO hotel-like apartments there. And it was primarily used by low-income households, not exclusively, and it wasn't reserved for low-income households, but that is really a lot of the folks who live there were low income. And so we will, at a minimum, want to replace what used to be there for that income. And we actually want to have what's called permanent supportive housing on this site, which is really targeted to homeless households with on-site services. And when you have a project that includes permanent supportive housing, there is nowhere in the United States where there's been a successful project where you mix a income of and a special needs households that are chronically homeless with $2,000 or $3,000 market rate apartments. And so the way that in the financing of affordable housing projects, they work if you have closer income ranges in the type of housing you do. So whether that's really low to moderate or moderate to high or right in the middle, that's the best way to do the property management and the financing of it. So that's a really long explanation, but that is the background.
If I could also add, Commissioner Lee, I feel very odd as the voice over your shoulder.
Oh, no, you're good.
But as far as the order of the proposed PUD supplemental regulations do require that the affordable phase be constructed first. And part of that, from the city perspective, is part of the benefits of this PUD is providing a higher level of affordable housing than would typically be required. And by making sure that that happens first, with a mixed income phase happening after, I think from a city perspective, that's a more certainty that the benefit is going to be realized. Whereas if it was the other way and we were applying a lower percentage of affordable housing as to the mixed income, that could create a question or an uncertainty about the realization of more affordable housing. So that's part of the rationale from the city perspective about why that order is as it is.
Gotcha. I appreciate both of those answers. I think that's really helpful for me. It's the rigidity of that language, I suppose, that makes me a little uneasy. I just don't want to see this passed and then somebody just come back for a PUD amendment or a exemption because they're like, well, it doesn't end up working because this construction is going to be $300 a foot and it's going to be very difficult for me to finance. So that's I understand, and I do think that the overall proposed PUD is consistent with the affordability and sustainability components that we've been prioritizing. So obviously, I am in support of this. I just don't want to see, it's like D1. Like the comment we got from Will Leaf earlier yesterday was, hey, we had the best of intentions pushing 30% requirements for FAR and D1. Not much development occurring from that. So this is done with the right objectives in mind, and I'm just wondering if the rigidity of this is going to create a scenario in which a developer who actually comes and underwrites this thing and says, I'm not sure that this works. I did a very, very quick back napkin takeoff, and I'm thinking to myself, if the land is free and there's probably more mechanisms, I could see it maybe penciling, but it just so my concern is just being too rigid about this 100%. When if the building was 70% affordable, I'd be happy to. So that's pretty much the comment I have. The other thing that I actually also want to grapple with is Mr. Caruso's comment about taller and denser not being sustainable. I'm guessing I'd like to look into that further. Obviously, with the it defies the conventional wisdom that I would have, but I want to look into it. It's probably embodied carbon life cycle assessment argument is kind of where my head's at. But I would like for staff to possibly look into that. It's very interesting to me. Again, defies the conventional wisdom that I'm used to, but. My comment is simply about the rationale of that 100% affordable, and hopefully we're not being too rigid in this approach. So other than that, I do like the discussions with respect to the green requirements, and this seems to be consistent with the values of pushing affordability. And so I'd be in support of this PUD. Just had the concerns about the rigidity of 100% first, all in, and then the mixed income when. That's it for me. Thank you.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Thank you. I think most of my questions are more clarifying. I agree, this is an amazing project. Can't wait to see it. Generally, I think it looks really good. So this is in no particular order. My first question, and this sort of is related also to what Mr. Westfall was talking about at the end of his comments. On the concept plan, we have, the active use. I think everyone's in agreement that it would be great to see some sort of, retail-like or some sort of active use on the bottom floor. And I'm wondering, in the supplemental regulations, it really reads as like residential. And maybe this is for staff, do we need to write in anything about like the active uses or like a desired retail component into this? Or is this just something that'll come back at site plan?
Well, so again, generally, the principal uses that are permitted are anything that are currently allowed in the D1. So that would be inclusive of residential, retail, service, all the appurtenant uses that are currently existing in D1 would also be permissible here.
Except for the things that we say are not.
I think to the conversation, it doesn't mandate that. So right now, you're seeing a concept that aspires to that active use. I don't think, again, with this level of detailed planning, we know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
It could be retail, it could be services to the building, like you've seen in some other downtown residential buildings. One of the challenges that we've talked about, I don't know if Michael or Jennifer want to talk about this more, is that because it's a relatively shallow footprint, actually, given the size of the building, because of that service alley and the transit lane. So that does actually limit the overall square footage, and that might limit some users because of the configuration of that space. But to be clear, no, it wouldn't prohibit any of those uses, but it also doesn't require them. So anything that would be permissible in the D1 would be permissible. Other than those, we are exclusively saying are not eligible.
Okay. I'm wondering if it's worth like writing into this like section 3 findings part A, like, you know, it says desirable to develop the land as a mixed income development. I'm just wondering, since these are sort of determinations, and if that's something that maybe came out, you know, even in any sort of public comment, like if we wanted to say anything about, you know, mixed income, mixed use, or I don't know, because that also wouldn't force it. It's just saying like, this is what's desirable. I mean, everything I was reading, I was like, oh, residential, residential. And then you see like, oh, active uses. So like, that just wasn't obvious to me. So I don't know. It's just something, I guess, to consider. Either way, I think it's fine. You're right. This doesn't preclude it.
I think once we have a development partner, I think what they would say is absolutely, we're doing retail on the first floor because it's the best return on our investment on, you know, per square footage. And then it's a matter of what can you realistically do on that first floor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's harder today, you know, with COVID and the impact on downtown businesses to confidently say what could happen there. But I guarantee that will be the goal of whoever our development partner is. Because you don't generate any revenue from first floor tenant services.
Right. Okay.
That's the backup.
Okay, my next question is about this driveways language in the supplemental reg. There should be no limitation on the number or width of driveways to the site. I assume, like you said, Michael, it's for the bus lanes. That language just feels so, I don't know, like it's concerning. Like, is this really addressing that northern portion of the site? I mean, I don't think this would happen in site plan, but this to me is just like, oh, if they wanted to come in and do some crazy like curb cuts, like all along William, which I don't even think is possible, but does the language have to be that strong, I guess is my question. Again, maybe Mr. Leonard, that's for you or for Mr. Khan.
Yeah.
Brett, I'll defer to you if you have any comments.
Yeah, I don't know. So both the driveway and you also notice the street frontage exceptions. Those are absolutely in response to the programming that's happening on those. Because one of the public benefits is dedicating that corridor, that tube of volume to the Blake Transit Center, that really takes that out of play for this site. And it goes against the normal requirements of D1, where we want an active building that occupies the bulk of that frontage. And so driveway limitations are the same way. We don't want these, you know, the old, you know, gas station where the whole width of the property is a curb cut. That's where, of course, those regulations come from. Similarly, here in the downtown, we want to really limit those conflicts. In this case, the PUD does propose exception to that because of the unique circumstances of the Blake there. That is adding a big aperture opening to this site that most sites don't need to accommodate. Normally, sites could just obviously function with their service alley and or maybe a vehicular access. Here, we're trying to limit that function to the greatest extent possible for the building itself to a service alley. For operational reasons that I'll let Ms. Hall and Mr. Carpenter speak to, it's really challenging to share that space for the successful use of both of them. That is, you don't want a garbage truck or a moving truck blocking access to the bus getting out on time. So, so that's where those come from. It is, you know, that's why it's an exception. It is something sort of typically we definitely wouldn't advocate in the downtown because of this circumstance where it's dedicating that frontage to the transit station. That's where staff is more comfortable with it in this circumstance.
But we're really just talking about 4th and 5th, right?
Yep.
I wonder if maybe like that should be clarified in there. Oh, yeah, or for AAA use or service use or something. I don't know, just when I read that, I was like, that made me kind of got taken aback a little bit, just because it is so different than what we would typically be advocating for. Okay, I can move along. Would we need to, how do we, this is a process question, how do we change things in a supplemental regulation? Like, do we need to motion things and?
Yeah, so,
Okay.
I'm taking notes, and ultimately, if you're ready to take action on it, it would be a motion to modify them.
Okay.
We could either come up with specific language, or because this is progressing to city council, if you have that comfort with staff, I'm happy to make sure that I understand the clarification that you'd like to see and to make those changes as it progresses. So we can do it either way if you're really interested in specific language. But thus far, I'm sort of making notations, and then I'm happy to sort of summarize those if you get into a position where you do want to take action this evening.
Okay, I have more stuff, so let's, you keep taking those notes. Okay, this is going back to what I was reading in the staff report about the parking agreement with the DDA, and I'm just curious why this would be something that the developer could look to do in phase 2, but not phase 1, and just wondering if that's something to do with like the financing differences between the sites.
I mean, I can chime in there just at least from the language perspective. I think we were talking about it from a particular requirement, right? So the affordable housing components do not have a parking requirement here. I think as we looked at the requirements for parking that's in excess of non-affordable units in excess of the 400%, but below the 900%, there is a delta there. And the intent of that was to say that delta could and should be achieved via partnership with the DDA parking resources that are significant in decks on either side.
Okay, got it. And then my next question or last question / maybe set of questions is about this section G in the supplemental regs. And this could be me doing bad math, but I feel like there's some conflicts between like this concept and then the things that are actually written out in these supplemental regs. You know, like part 3, for example, the entire PUD district shall provide a minimum of 100 well, I guess I should back up. So you've said that that first phase, the all affordable phase, at least in this concept plan, would be 90 units. And then I'm reading in here in this part 2, in the mixed income phase, basically if the developer paid a fee in lieu, that could have 0 affordable units, which then it really wouldn't be a mixed income phase. And then we would be left on the site with only 90 units affordable. But then part 3 says the entire district shall provide a minimum of 100. I don't know if I'm missing something, if I'm just like doing math wrong.
No, I don't think you're doing math wrong. And this question came up. That was the intention. If you look at the last portion of number 3, and maybe this is on me for not being clear, but the intention of this is that the sort of goal, the goal is a minimum of 100 affordable dwelling units and 40%. So at least 100, but if 40% represents a bigger number, then we'll meet that. That total can be met by by the 2 phases. So that could be met by the provision of units, the provision of units in the mixed income, or payment in lieu of units. So you're correct. That 100 units could ultimately be comprised of 90 units in the affordable phase and 10 units payment in lieu in the mixed income phase.
So payment in lieu still counts as units.
Yes, that's the intention.
Gotcha. Okay. But then that wouldn't necessarily meet the intention of replacing the 100 on site. But, okay, that makes sense. In that second thing, though, this is a little confusing too. This requirement for west only, isn't west the affordable phase? So shouldn't it say for east?
It should say mixed income phase. My apologies.
Okay. Okay. All right. That, I think, is it for now. And I want to hear more discussion before I decide on a motion, or if I just will let you. Trust you. Thanks.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Dish.
I don't have a lot to say because everyone else has said so much.
Commissioner Dish, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the audience can't hear you. I'm not sure what's going on with your microphone.
That's weird. It's on.
We can't hear you on
Very close to
here.
it. Yes, thank you. So I'm really happy that it's all electric. And I do want to say that of all the places, I don't think Ann Arbor would want to model itself after Paris, mostly in this respect, that Paris is less affordable than even San Francisco, New York, or London when we compare incomes to rents. It is 28th of 53 world cities on this measure. To its credit, it is doing an aggressive attempt to build social housing. And so if we could model ourselves and try to produce 7,000 units a year, as Paris is doing right now, but it is not an affordable city. And I am entirely willing to see height in our downtown, where height is fine and dandy, in order to meet affordable housing goals.
Any other, Commissioner Gibrandel?
I'm glad you said something, Commissioner Dish, because I wholeheartedly agree with that. And then the other thing I guess I would like to add on that is that we could mimic Paris if we knocked down all of the houses in Ann Arbor and built 3-4-story buildings everywhere in the city, but we're not planning on doing that, I don't think. And so it's really difficult to compare those two forms. And I think that a lot of these statistics are really interesting and helpful for us to be able to think about ourselves within sustainability. I think that the embodied carbon of construction is definitely an issue. I think steel and concrete are definitely an issue. But I have a hard time believing that if we had, 370 units of affordable housing somewhere in this city, that those people would be driving. They would be driving. And I just have a really hard time believing that we are building something where people can live close to their work and be able to get to it on transit, and that is really powerful. So I think that that information is really helpful at the macro level, but at the micro level, when we're actually designing sites and really looking at all the interactions that are happening with those, I think that it starts to fall apart a little bit with this particular set of circumstances, because I feel like this project has so much going for it. And I'm sorry I didn't say that earlier. I really am truly supportive of what you all are doing here. In that vein, because you have some excellent goals here that you're trying to meet, I'm assuming that you would likely be doing some sort of geothermal something to be able to achieve what you're going to achieve given an all-electric building. And something that a caller several months ago brought up, and I'm trying to remember if it was at Planning Commission or Environmental Commission, that I think it was Ken Wilbur brought up that with street reconstruction, you have an opportunity for geothermal. And that at the end of your presentation, you have that whole rebuilt 4th Ave project. And because this is a city project, that it's a difficult thing to pull off between private and public and all that kind of thing, but it's a city project, so is there some sort of way to dovetail those efforts? It's just something I'm gonna kind of throw spaghetti at the wall, and I know you're not at site plan and all that kind of thing, but I just want to look at possibilities for ways to have synergies between projects, and to think about ways that we can make them work for us, because Mr. Caruso is correct that these tiny footprints mean solar is really difficult to have a meaningful impact. Geothermal probably has a much greater impact in a building like this, and you need some space for that. Not just, we'd have to do a lot of deep wells if we were going to pull that off for that project. So I would encourage you to just consider that, and I'm really glad that we have callers and citizens that bring forth these kinds of examples and ideas. And I'm really grateful that we have a citizenry that teaches us about things too, because it allows us to be able to look for possible connections and possibilities. So thank you, Mr. It's Wilbur, right? Am I right? Garber. I always say Garber. Ken Garber, thank you very much for bringing that up a few months ago.
I have a number of things written down, and most of them have been covered. When we did the pre-PUD meeting, I shared how I am always more comfortable with a site plan rather than an area plan or conceptual plan. And so I'm always looking for kind of the holes or kind of what is portrayed, and what's different. Like, how could what gets built if we pass these regulations differ from what we're seeing in ways that the public might not expect? And I think a lot of those things we've been bringing up. And first of all, I want to compliment you, as I did, I think, last time, about having really bland buildings in here. Not promising what they're going to look like, because I think that that's really important. And I think also, while it didn't 100% max out the height, you got pretty darn close, which I think is really good to put it in context. And so I really appreciate that, rather than showing the shortest building that you could imagine, if that's what a concern is going to be. And to be clear, it's not a concern of mine. But if that is something that people are uncomfortable with, then showing kind of the most massive building that you could imagine. So the couple of things that I have on here are just kind of reactions to that. I think I want to be clear that what we've seen are two buildings that are different heights, but to be clear, ultimately, both buildings could max out that height. Is that, Mr. Leonard or Mr. Khan? Am I reading that right?
Yes.
Is there, also, will it always be two buildings? I was also thinking of what's the comfort of this? And we've had a lot of talk about breaking up facades, and I feel like one of my very early things on Planning Commission was thinking about the maximum diagonal. And so is that one way to overcome any concern that you've got two, a big blocky building?
It's something we could look at. I do think that that's part of the intention of clearly identifying two separate phases. And I think your analysis is good, but because this is structured, there does have to be sort of two components to the building. Just to share with the Planning Commission, we went through a bit of an evolution with this, where originally, as you see from my poor editing, there was an east phase and a west phase. Even that, and to Commissioner Lee's point previously, we were trying to build in a little bit more flexibility. We don't, that might be our initial thought about which one of those affordable and mixed income phases might be located on which portion of the property. But even that, we tried to generalize to provide some flexibility, because as some of the things that Ms. Hall was talking about, there will be some very real factors about financing, particularly if the affordable housing has to go first, that will likely limit the number of units. There is a sweet spot in financing those types of developments where, as she indicated, and I don't profess to have this expertise, but as you get out of a certain range, it becomes difficult to do, because you can't bring the funding mechanisms to that. So I think that by breaking it into two components, it will probably practically have an impact to make one phase smaller and another phase taller. But you're right. There's something that could be inconceivable where both are built to that max.
Okay, I just want to be clear and to say, I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that right, and that if anybody else is not, knowing that that's part of what's kind of in the regs.
Commissioner Mills, if I could chime in, I just want to clarify one thing that Brett said. I do think we're still limited by 900% FAR on this site, though, so that would be a limiting factor, right, Brett?
Yes. Yeah, and that's true. Right now it's at 867 or something like that. So that would be another limiting factor.
Okay, got it. Because it's not addressed, because FAR, just to make sure that I'm understanding this, not addressed in here, then that's, okay. And also then, how you arrived at, the bike parking was the one thing that I stood out to, especially because we had callers saying yay, look at all that great bike parking, and that it was not in here. The way that you arrived at that number was using the calculation that is the whatever your square footage is, it's one space per 2,500 now. So you're not showing us more than, okay, super.
That's correct.
Awesome. The next part that's along this lines, and I think that the discussion about this thing helped, is that downtown design guidelines are not addressed here. And because they're not, does that mean that they hold?
Yes, and this concept was presented to the design review board as well. As you can imagine, because of its conceptual nature, that was sort of the level of review, but that would also return to them as well.
So that actually got over my concern about the active use on the first floor. I think we talked about this in the kind of pre-meeting, not wanting to tie people's hands, and that those kind of active uses would be seeking the best rent, but we also don't want empty spaces. Just to make everybody, I pulled it up, the UDC, to remind everybody, like, there's a minimum height on the first floor to allow for that flexibility. And so I think in that way, like, it gives me a whole lot more comfort knowing that those design guidelines are carried through here. Also, it includes like how much glazing and that kind of stuff. So it also includes the kind of materials that are allowed. So again, even though we don't know exactly what, if Commissioner Milstein were here, he would ask about the color of the building. We don't know what color the building's gonna be, but there is some comfort because and that's actually unique to downtown because not all parts of the city have that kind of design. So that actually covers, I think, all of the things where I was thinking like, okay, what could we see that we're not covered? And so I'm really, really excited to see this go forward, and hope that kind of doing this phase and having it done gives more assurances to the folks, to a developer, to come and actually make this happen. But I too have my small list of at least the two things that I heard from commissioners that I thought, which were about street trees and the driveways, being more specific about that. Is there anything else before we can see what's on Mr. Leonard's list? Go ahead, Commissioner Lee.
I just have a very minor clarification. For the record, I am all for height, and I am all to see this in a very dense format. The 250 feet looks great. My point was just to give consideration to the public comment. It's so incredibly important for civic engagement. So to give credence to what Mr. Caruso proffered, I think is important, and I really do appreciate his position. So just for the record, I'm all for 250 feet, density and height, so.
All right. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Leonard, can you share with us what you have?
I can. I even have some suggestions. So as I'm going through this, I would particularly ask Ms. Hall and Mr. Johnson to also be listening closely because I'm going to make some suggestions. And if they resonate with the commission, they're going to ask you as the petitioner if they resonate with you and are acceptable. So on my list, first off is, of course, correcting my typo. The west will be replaced with the mixed income phase. There was conversation about street trees based on, I think the depth of the property is about 130 feet. Again, we're talking about 4th and 5th Avenue. That would, under typical code requirements, require 3 street trees along those perimeters. We could simply say a minimum of 1 street tree is required along the 4th and 5th Avenue street frontages. That is a third of what would be required. It is at least some greenery along those facades, but it also hopefully will provide some more flexibility for the design of the service alley and the bus lane. The ordinance is clear. It distinguishes vehicle parking from bike parking. So by omitting vehicle parking, it is talking about motor vehicles. It is not granting any exception to the bike parking. That will be measured amongst the normal standards as we talked about. We could add, and I think this would be amenable, hopefully, to the petitioner. We could clarify the driveways that we could add a sentence. Additionally, that no curb cuts will be permissible along William Street. I think one of the things that was resonating that seemed overly broad, and I don't think that there's any intention to interfere with the William Street bike lane. That would clarify it. It would provide the flexibility along the 4th and 5th Avenues, but would prohibit a vehicular curb cut of any way off of William Street. And the question about active uses, that's the one that there was discussion about. Certainly active uses are allowed. The design requirements for the D1 are going to require a height. Our intention is to ensure flexibility for that space long term, but I'm not proposing at this point any requirement for any type of programming of that first floor. So the changes would be the typo, require a minimum of 1 street tree along 4th and 5th, but provide exemption from the balance of that requirement, and prohibit curb cuts along the William Street frontage of the property.
Go ahead, Commissioner Abrams.
Thank you. Those all sound great to me, except I want to poke at the driveway question just a little bit more. Because if I'm correct, that service drive is not in the regulations. So that's something that's part of the area plan, but could disappear in the site plan. Is that correct? In other words, the AAATA bus lane is in the regulations, but the service lane is not.
The service lane is not, but to the extent you're going to need that for the building to function.
So we're 100% sure that there's no version of the site plan that does not include that service drive and could still meet.
Let's pose that to the petitioners.
Well, so the reason I'm bringing that up is just to say, I wonder if the limitation, instead of saying William Street, should be one that's more about AAATA. Which if the current language says.
Sort of not counting the AATA towards the drives.
Yeah, or it says right now there shall be no limitation on the number or width of driveways to the site. It could say there shall be no limitation on the number or width of driveways that service AAATA. Or something, you probably can write it better, but, and otherwise the driveway limits would be what they are in the UDC.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. So the
If that doesn't make sense, if that only makes sense to me, I can let it go. What's that? Well, because that's who we're trying to maintain flexibility for AAATA specifically, right? In that F1 provision. I mean, 3, E3, sorry. If other people think the William Street makes sense, I can, that's fine too. I don't think I just was noticing that the service drive is not in there. So that's like a concept plan thing, not a supplemental regulations thing.
Commissioner Weich and then Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Hammerschmidt can go before me.
Oh, all right.
I was just going to ask, if there was nothing in there about driveways, like what it would default back to, would that provide for a service drive? So if we said like no limitation for the use of a AAATA, like would that still allow for a service drive under the current?
Yeah, without the exception, it would probably allow the service drive, but then the combination of the service drive and the transit lane would exceed the maximum number of drives and widths of drives that are permissible in the district.
But
So-
if we said that there's no limitation for AAATA use, wouldn't that still mean that you could still do a service drive?
Yeah, I think that's how I'm thinking about it, is that there wouldn't be an exception for driveway width and number. We wouldn't count AATA access towards that.
Yes, yes.
That makes more sense.
It is, at the sake of driving this too far. Thank you. I try. So in the D1, the drive-through facilities have to be permitted through a special exception use. So we couldn't see a retail occupant that tries to leverage that service drive in a drive-through. Am I correct in my understanding?
Yeah, we're explicitly prohibiting drive-throughs.
Okay, great. That was just my question.
Thank you for double checking that. Commissioner Gabrandel.
If you look at the plan, I think it makes sense if we just keep it on William, because effectively what's happening is they're sharing the same driveway opening. And so what they've done is just pulled back the separation between the two as it gets towards the ends. And what that allows them to do is to not have big radii coming out from each one. It allows them to have flexibility to be able to cross over. And so it's this kind of thing, I think, that gives them flexibility to be able to pull off what they're pulling off. And then also as the development moves forward, I'm totally against anything on William. And so I'm comfortable with that. But I do think that we should give them kind of design freedom to be able to come up with creative solutions like this that keep it from being like two separate things, which would then really make it difficult for them.
Go ahead, Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
I think that makes sense. I think I was seeing these as like 4, but actually now looking at this again, like it wouldn't make sense to do that. Just, yeah. So what would your proposed language be for that instead? Like
I wouldn't change that language. I would add a sentence to that additionally prohibits any driveways along the William Street frontage.
Okay, so it would basically be something like no limitation, well, I mean, would that, okay. So do you think it's better to explicitly prohibit William than to say like no limitation on the number of widths, like on 4th and 5th?
So yeah, to be clear, it would provide a lot of utmost flexibility on 4th and 5th, and it would prohibit any consideration of any access drive through William Street.
Okay. I will trust your edit if it does that.
In case you can't see, there's lots of nodding. So from this side, the people who proposed those things, which is fixing the typo, the street trees, and the no William Street curb cut that we just discussed, seem friendly on this side. But the question is to you all on Zoom, is this something that seems doable to you?
Jennifer, I'll ultimately defer to you as the petitioner, but from a design perspective, it seems certainly doable and I think within the spirit of what we're trying to achieve. I think we'll take Jennifer's silence as a yes.
Okay, I was going to say, I saw like a nod and friendly. Okay, awesome. Trying to read like body language in this dual format is really fun, guys. Okay, so I would wonder then if there is a commissioner who would like to make a motion to amend? Is that move to amend with those 3 changes as previously articulated, moved by Commissioner Abrams, seconded by Commissioner Hammerschmidt. Any discussion of the 3 amendments that we could just kind of hashed out? How did you let that through? The typo, that's what we want to know, Mr. Leonard.
That's why I'm in the corner.
The typo was on my list, but this is why I go last, so I don't have to rub salt into the wounds. All right, all in favor of the amendments, please raise your hand or say yes. I see all of the hands. So we're back to now an amended motion. Any other discussion? You want a roll call?
Yes, please.
All right, can you call it then?
Commissioner Mills,
Yes.
Commissioner Dish,
Yes.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark,
Yes.
Commissioner White,
Yes.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt,
Yes.
Commissioner Abrams,
Yes.
Commissioner Sauvé,
Yes.
Commissioner Gabrandel.
Yes.
It's so nice to just see you instead of have to go off a list. The motion carries unanimously.
Very good. Thank you very much. We're looking
Thank
forward to
you.
this moving forward and coming to fruition.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Can't you all?
I'm trying to read the room. Should we power through, or do we need to stretch for a minute? Power through. Okay. All right, thank you. So we're on to item number 9, which, 9A, this is a revised Planning Commission meeting calendar. We won't have a public hearing for this. Mr. Leonard, you had in the notes why there were the changes. Do you want to go over that, or?
No, I think they're all noted on the calendar, just some schedule adjustments and self-explanatory.
Okay, so we need a motion to move the revised agenda, or revised calendar, moved by Commissioner Dish, seconded by Commissioner Lee. Any discussion? All in favor, please raise a hand or say yes. I see all of the hands, so that motion carries unanimously. So we are to item 10 now, which is our last opportunity for public comment. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about any issue. We will normally call on individuals who are here in the audience first, but we have none. So we will move to those who have joined us remotely. If you've already called in and wish to provide a comment, you can press *9 on your phone, or if you've joined us through Zoom, you can use the raised hand button. If you're watching us and want to call in now, the number is 877-853-5247, and our meeting ID is 977-6634-1226. Mr. Leonard will call on those who have raised their hand. If you've dialed in, he's going to call on the last 3 digits of your telephone number. If you've joined through Zoom, he'll call you by whatever name you enter. Please, when you're speaking, move to a quiet area and mute any background sounds so that we can hear you clearly. Please also state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Mr. Leonard, anybody called in?
Just give it a few moments. We have a couple of attendees. Nobody's indicated a desire to speak yet.
We can actually physically hear and hear the clock ticking.
Mr. Juskevich, you have up to 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think it's super helpful when you guys kind of explain some of the process stuff around these things, as far as like the differences between what's actually in the PUD versus kind of the conceptual stuff that's just kind of ideas around what could be built under that PUD. It really makes things a lot clearer for people from the community who are calling in. So thank you for that. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others, Mr. Leonard?
Let's just give it another moment. I don't see any indicated currently. If anybody would like to speak, please use the raise hand feature.
Or *9?
Nope.
All righty. We're on to item 11 then, Commission Proposed Business. Any? Go ahead, Commissioner Weich.
I'll try to be brief. So I watched council's meeting on Tuesday where Councilmember Griswold made this motion for us to take a look at this proposed housing deliberation. And so I know we can email questions, but I just wondered, is this going to start in the working session? Is it going to come immediately to an agenda? And are we able to reject it and send it back to council, like after a discussion that we might have? So just trying to understand what the process might be. And the reason for my questions along that line is it's looking to create 2,000 units of housing on potentially university-owned land that would not be taxable. So it's a huge conversation that I'm trying to figure out, like, how would I even begin to wrap my mind around why we as Planning Commission would recommend to council to take up building 2,000 units of housing at the university level. So just trying to figure out how we're going to approach this, or should I just wait until someone says, now we're going to talk about it, so get to work and do your background and bring all of that to the conversation. So any guidance that you could give me would be appreciated, including, don't ask me this question right now because we're trying to adjourn the meeting and leave.
No, this is a great time rather than an agenda that goes until 10:30 or 11. So, Mr. Leonard, did you have thoughts on when this would be scheduled or how? Because I think that that's a great question, and I didn't know about this until, well, there was the email when it was forwarded to us, but I hadn't known that it was actually.
You were mentioned by name because you couldn't find your public email.
Yeah, in short, I haven't put together a detailed plan, but definitely anticipate it coming back to the Planning Commission for, on an agenda for discussion. I don't think a working session's a bad idea. That would probably provide a nice forum for a good dialogue back and forth. That would mean it would still have to appear on another Planning Commission, a regular agenda to make any recommendation. As for rejection, I guess my advice would be for the Planning Commission to just consider and provide the aspects of it that you think are, maybe worth considering or not worth considering. I'm sure the council's open to it, I think the part of this purpose is shaping it as much of it has to live as in its current format or not. Part of that I can see what I can find out. My understanding is that there might be some circumstances where development would occur on university property that would be taxable. It sort of depends on the structure of that transaction. There are some public-private partnerships that could be born out of something like this, where there might be a private entity that, because it's not for the purpose of the university, it might not have that tax exempt status. Just raising that as a possibility, I don't profess, but that's something that I could try and answer for that working session. So I guess I think that would make sense if that seems agreeable to the balance of the commission. We could schedule that for a working session. Any questions or information that you think would be helpful, send that to me so I can assemble that information and present it there. We could have that conversation, and then you can take any recommendation action that you want to at a future meeting. So with that, from a timing perspective, that would probably put it on the February working session, so the second week in February.
To follow up on Commissioner Weich's excellent questions and suggestions, I'm wondering, council is planning to have a work session with Michael Ryan and Sue Gott being the planning director for UM. Would it be helpful to have them come to our work session and apprise us of their plans, both their plans with respect to their staging of their comprehensive land use planning, which they are initiating that. I was in a meeting with them just last week, and they indicated a real willingness and interest to coordinate their comprehensive plan with our comprehensive planning to find where we have mutually beneficial things. North Campus was not mentioned as a place where they thought we could combine, but that doesn't mean we can't talk to them about that. But they have indicated this desire around, to coordinate our efforts coming up. So I don't know if it's appropriate to have visitors like that at a planning commission meeting, but I think they are very willing to be very transparent about what they're doing and what they, what their timing is and where they see compatibilities with us.
Yeah, absolutely, we could invite them. And I have a lot of the same understanding as Commissioner Dish that they are starting to undertake a planning process as well. I guess my only hesitation would be to the extent that they get that invite from the Planning Commission, the Environmental Commission, the Energy Commission, and the Transportation Commission. At some point, they might get tired. But yeah, it would be absolutely appropriate. I'm happy to reach out and invite them to that discussion.
Doesn't our meeting overlap with one of those, does our work session overlap with one of those other commissions? Okay. I was just wondering
Yeah.
if there were opportunities to actually make it more efficient. Yeah,
Sue Gott's pretty good. She can probably be two places at once.
probably, yeah. And I would just chime in, again, this is like gut reaction. The key question that I have is, what discretion would we have? My understanding is that there's, like, this is where, within our purview, it is our city policy that, you know, that we review city projects, even though it is on public land. But this is a higher level of government, actually. And so I'm curious about that. I think that the tax issue is an important one for the city probably to raise, but not often something that factors into our work so much. And I would just suggest, in a random project, like, I think that there is an example at Central Michigan where there is a hotel or something that's on, a private hotel on campus land that's taxed. So that could be something to look into. But I think that the bigger question before our body is, we try where we can in the planning process to include them, but I'm not sure what, like, I don't know what that looks like, because that's not something that I
Yeah.
understood to be within our purview.
Yeah, I agree, but I think but the planning commission does advise the council on land use planning matters, so that might be an appropriate lens to consider this. You know, to your point, sort of the details of transactions and taxation and the like might be relevant to the city as a whole, but maybe that's the lens that the planning commission chooses to provide advice. How does this relate to the city's sort of aspirations of the comprehensive plan?
Other comments on this? And does that answer your question about, like, when we're going to do this? So it sounds like February 8th.
I'm just hedging because I don't want to keep us any longer. So the only question I think I have is, one, I'm fine to get a memo from the University of Michigan. I don't know that, you know, I would be recommending a meeting, because especially if what you just said is the case, that our purview is about land use planning. We don't actually have an allocation of land that would be inside the City of Ann Arbor's comprehensive plan for us to make a recommendation on yet. So we would be looking at a feasibility of this without the appropriate land designation to apply the city's planning guidelines to. So I feel like it's a chicken, an egg, a catch, a 22, and I want to kick it back to council and say, once that aspect of it has been decided, then planning would take up recommendations on how to zone it, how to, you know, what district it should belong to. And that feels appropriate, but I don't, you know, because of open meetings acts and stuff like that, you know, any emails that I send to all of you then become a meeting. And so I just figured if we could sort of settle that before we got going on it and before I started doing any work on it, I would love to know what to do. So I think that's it.
Okay. I saw Commissioner Dish wanting to chime in.
I just wanted to say, we plan and they plan. And they indicated that they were interested in seeing where their plans could feed each other. And I thought it would be great for us to talk to them, us, the Planning Commission, not just the council. And if the direction that, or the advice we want to give to council is, hey, we talked to the university and we don't really think any of this is a terribly great idea. And we'd like you to know that, and end of sentence, right? We're asked to, or we could say, oh my God, fantastic. The university came and they said they wanted to give all of North Campus to the city to plan. That would be great too. But it would be, you know, we're allowed to advise council based on what we hear the university telling us about their plans. So that would be my rationale for why I think it would be fun to entertain them. Not entertain them with drinks or food, but just...
Keep your mask on.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, keep your mask on. And I would just concur that, I mean, because of the employment, like, you know, this is the largest employer by far, right? Like knowing, and not just in terms of what their land use plans are, but in, I think, helping to lay the groundwork for our comprehensive planning, understanding their growth trajectory for the future would be really helpful for us to know, rather than being in a black box. So letting them know that we do care, like that's going to feed into us. I could see both sides. I just want to make sure that it's more about the planning, because my understanding is not so much the zoning. Yeah?
So, shall I invite them? I would prefer to give them the opportunity. I think it'd be, to that point, it actually might be twofold. It might be to provide some context to this, but to also just invite them to talk to the Planning Commission about their plans for undertaking their own planning, what factors they're considering, sort of half general education session and maybe a component of this. And whether or not the Planning Commission comes to any resolution at that point, I don't think it's just going to be more information. Okay. I've decided.
All right, very good. So we'll see if they're available.
Yeah.
For the working session, and then.
Is there anything going on at the university now? No, okay.
No scandals, no bills, no.
Any other commission proposed business? Go ahead, Commissioner Abrams.
This is going to be very quick. I think we received a communication from Will Leaf about putting affordable housing premiums on our work plan, and I wanted to confirm that that is already on our work plan, isn't it? I thought it was, so I could also do my homework and go check before I ask this question.
If it's not, it will be.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, my COVID brain is fuzzy on whether or not we actually revised the work plan or talked about it, but I think there was consensus that that was an issue that we wanted to look at before too long.
That is my memory as well. Okay, thanks.
Anything else? All right, I'm happy to entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Weich, seconded by Commissioner Gibrandl. All in favor? Raise your hand, and we can actually say goodbye to each other rather than wave goodbye and have the Zoom room like instantly close. We're adjourned.